Hello. So I'm David Abura. I'm a director of Cordia East Africa, and I'm also chairing IPBES, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and in the Earth Commission. I'm presenting what I've learned from these organizations in terms of a systems model of sustainability in relation to nature and capital together as inputs for further discussions. I'm going to go through some concepts quite quickly here because hopefully this is just a quick teaser for further discussion. Now, the sustainable development paradigm developed from the 1970s or 80s onwards and really developed up until around 2015 or so around three main principles. So nature, economy, and society as the three pillars or the triple bottom line. And then a second concept around the gradient from weak to strong sustainability, depending on the degree of substitutability between these capitals or pillars that was assumed. At this point in time, this is when the Sustainable Development Goals were developed and based on this concept of strong sustainability. Now, the third main foundation for sustainable development was, of course, the dependence on nature and supply of ecosystem services to economy and society. And around 2015, this is when also IPBES's conceptual framework was developed and published as a foundation for all of the assessments that IPBES has been doing over the years. This is a simplified version of the conceptual framework and was really consolidated in the global assessment in 2019. Now, from this point, there's been a bit of a departure of threads of work. So within IPBES, based on its conceptual framework, and then in the sustainable development world, there's been a strong focus on the sustainable development goals themselves, as opposed to the model or the paradigm itself going through further development. So in exploring next steps, I came back to the original framing of sustainable development as a systems model, which Nella Meadows and others, of course, established. And the key point about a system is that the system has nodes, linkages, and purpose. In this case, we have the 3 domains or 17 goals, depending on the level you're looking at. It could be the nodes, their interactions between them, or the linkages, and the purpose is sustainable development. Now, to take this further, I just want to be explicit about the translation from IPBES's conceptual framework, shown here, to the sustainable development paradigm in nature, economy, and society together. Because the conceptual framework, while it's excellent for organizing assessments and scientific knowledge, it is very hard to communicate with policymakers, the public, and decision makers. So nature is very straightforward, of course, as are nature's contributions to people, which come out from the nature box, and direct drivers, which flow into nature. But it's these 3 boxes in the middle that are a bit harder to disaggregate into economy and society, but nevertheless possible. And so societal benefits really flow from economy to society, and these may be shared well or poorly, depending on the context. And then based on societal values, governance and other factors, indirect drivers are imposed from society to economy, which then control the direct drivers on nature. So in IPBES's global assessment, this systems model was elaborated, certainly from the bottom half of this image, quite quantitatively. On the one hand, the direct uses or nature's contributions to people, in which these are disaggregated into 18 classes, shown on the left. And the global assessment assessed the 50-year trends, whether declining or increasing. The direct drivers were also assessed quantitatively. 5 direct drivers were identified, and their impacts on biodiversity. Now, I'll just illustrate a particular narrative, perhaps the dominant one that we're looking at now, based on this model to show its utility. So let's have a look at these 3 NCP or contributions that are increasing, so energy, food and feed, and materials and assistance. And of course, these are the NCP that we commoditize and trade and sell in our economies and monetize them. And because of this maximization, the uses, the way we extract these NCP lead to the direct drivers of land and sea use change, direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, invasive alien species. And so, there's no mystique about why these 3 NCPs are increasing and all the others are declining. It's because of the way our economy works and the maximization that we apply in this economic and financial model that we have. Now, climate change is, of course, growing in importance and as a direct driver, but then also, as we should, we're looking at nature-based solutions, or how the NCP related to regulation of climate, erosion acidification, can be used to help as a climate solution. But the danger that we're seeing very clearly around the world is that if these are just maximized and monetized the same way as we have approached the prior three NCP, we'll just expand the direct drivers, and there'll be multiplier effects driving the system farther into crisis. So it's really important that we look well at the systems model to understand how to balance across it rather than maximize or silo individual components of it. So it's useful in a systems model to think of each node containing capital or assets that generate its functions. The linkages represent flows, material or immaterial flows between the nodes, and the system purpose is, of course, sustainable development for the whole system to persist and grow, as opposed to some elements of the system declining and eventually toppling the whole framework. The operational model on the right there is the Sustainable Development Goals, and various of these goals can be put into the nature, economy, and society buckets, and their interlinkages, of course, are very tangible, especially when you look at local levels. In the center there, you can look at the interactions between them. But I'm going to stay with the broader systems model in exploring this further, particularly in looking at economy and finance implications of this model. Now, money, or finance, initially emerged to transact the crops and commodities people extracted from nature, to be able to sell and buy and trade them in markets with one another. But over time, and particularly now in capitalist and neoliberal models, finance has taken on a life of its own. It's become a final repository of wealth, extracting from this systems model, from economy and society, of course being invested back down as well. But it's clear not enough now. And the challenge we have at the moment in terms of thinking about natural systems is how to get more financial capital back into natural capital. At planetary limits, nature's declining globally. The key challenge is precisely this: getting enough finance into nature, conservation, restoration, and so on. Now, a systems approach, I hope, is useful here because it helps understand this system imbalance. So we can consider, if we consider all the capital flows, the flows between the capitals in this figure, that excess conversion has happened into finance, degrading nature. This excess finance must be converted back into natural capital to sustain the Earth system, as well as social capital in relation to equity and justice. Now, just looking at a broad picture of global finance to see what this implies. So we know that the global GDP is about $105 trillion, and let's say it's the area of this slide. 55% of this global economy is highly to moderately dependent on nature, and 6.7 trillion of the global economy is in nature negative flows, a quarter of which is public. If we look at the nature positive components of this, we have current biodiversity funding of about $135 billion. Overseas development assistance and philanthropy is about $13 billion as part of that. Nature-based solutions comprise about $200 billion currently, and a biodiversity funding gap of $830 billion has been identified. Now, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the primary instrument for the global community to bring more finance into nature, has identified two targets. Target 19 seeks to expand that $135 billion of current biodiversity funding to $200 billion, of which 15% should be from ODA. And target 18 is to repurpose or reform $500 billion of those nature negative subsidies and flows into nature positive ones. And it's clear from this graphic that the green and the blue parts of this figure are far smaller than the red parts. And that's because they're working against the flow. The financial system basically incentivizes extractivism from nature. And so any of the solutions that we are trying, it's like pushing a ball uphill. So I'm hoping the systems perspective on reforming global finance, i.e. making finance work with nature, not against it, can help help strengthen three perspectives. So one is the need to end externalities. Business or economic activities must pay the true costs of their activities. This is equivalent to polluter pays. It can include historical aspects, of course, of greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants. It's an absurd principle that externalities should exist in the economic system when you look at the systems model as a whole. Second one is to repurpose those nature negative flows. There's a lot of attention being paid to that now, so that big red box doesn't have to be taken away from the global economy. It just needs to be spent on different things. So circularizing, nature positive subsidies and so on can be solutions. Then the third part that is newer from this perspective is on the concept of wealth, financial capital, which really has embedded or historical extraction within it, over-extraction from nature. So how do we convert excess financial capital back into essential natural capital is an existential question that I believe we need to address. And there's a need to link this finance to nature at local scales across the entire planet. So here on land, but also in sea and in freshwater systems, it's important to look at 1 kilometer scales. So we understand the condition of nature at that scale, and also the provisioning of nature's contributions to people, so that people's needs are met locally across these scales. So this addresses issues of global to local commons. There's of course a lot of jurisdictional issues as well, and rights-based approaches will be relevant here. So finally, this entails a change in values, of course. So what do people value and in what ways? So coming to the IPBES values assessment in 2022 and looking at this sustainable development model, the values assessment deepened our understanding of intrinsic, instrumental and relational values of nature, and it's clear how they pass amongst these three domains of sustainable development. And instrumental values are principally measured by finance, and maximizing that has, of course, been a big part of the challenge. The assessment developed this integrative illustration of worldviews and knowledge systems at the outermost, and which contain sets of broad values, and within these specific values and value indicators, and then cutting across these four life frames of nature, living from, in, with, or as nature, which relate to the values of nature. And given that this was developed with IPBES's conceptual framework in mind, looking at the sustainable development model as well, it's clear that this really relates to the broad values, contained within the outer circle of worldviews and knowledge systems, which is very important for this discussion, because it means if we frame solutions or questions or issues around the sustainable development framework, we can address them coherently across different worldviews across the world, and also addressing different value perspectives that are intrinsic, instrumental, and relational at the same time. So we can have compatible and consistent actions across space in different places. So what I hope this brings up for discussion, so three things. So cultures and societies hold many different worldviews and knowledge systems, characterized by varied intrinsic, instrumental, and relational values. And we can develop solutions that can address that variety. We need to make finance do its job, supporting transactions and value flows, as opposed to being a final repository. And within a coherent systems model, the tools and instruments that we're trialing around the world right now, be they bonds, biodiversity and other credits, blended instruments, these need to be supported by the system, not undermined by the system, which is currently the case. I look forward to discussing this in various fora. So thank you.